The wind bit sharply against Martha Hill's wrinkled cheeks as she trudged along the side of the empty highway, clutching her thin coat tighter around her frail body. The gray clouds above hung low, threatening rain, and every breath she took came out in a puff of white mist. Her small purse swung gently by her side. Inside was her last $10, the remainder of her monthly pension check. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her little heater running for another night in her drafty old house. She was almost a corner where the bus stopped when she saw him, a young man kneeling beside a motorcycle, his hands black with grease, his face pale with frustration. The bike's engine was dead, its tank bone dry. The man looked like he'd been there a while, stranded in the cold. Martha hesitated. She didn't have much, but she recognized that look. Exhaustion mixed with quiet defeat. She knew it well. She'd seen it in her own mirror. The man looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Ma'am, do you happen to have a phone I could use?" he asked. His voice was low, polite. "Ran out of gas a few miles back, and my phone's dead." She shook her head. "No phone, dear. Just me and this old coat." He gave a short, embarrassed laugh and looked away. "Figures. Just my luck." Something in Martha's chest ached. She could see how young he was, maybe mid-20s, with tired eyes that spoke of long roads and rough nights. Her trembling hands reached into her purse. She pulled out the single $10 bill, the one she had planned to use for heat that night. "Here," she said softly, pressing the worn bill into his hand before he could protest. The man blinked, startled. "Ma'am, I can't take your money." She smiled faintly. "You look like you could be someone's boy." He froze. "My Jimmy was about your age when he died," she continued, her voice trembling. "If he were stranded somewhere on a cold night, I'd pray someone would help him too." The man's throat tightened. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, with shaky fingers, he accepted the bill. "Thank you, ma'am," he whispered. "I'll pay you back, I promise." Martha shook her head, smiling gently. "No, son. Just promise me you'll help someone else when you can." He nodded, his eyes moist. "You got it." Minutes later, she watched as he filled his tank at the distant gas station, waved at her one last time, and roared off down the highway. The echo of his engine lingered in the air like a promise. Martha turned back toward home, her shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The wind had picked up, carrying with it the smell of rain. She walked slower than usual, her old knees aching, but her heart felt oddly light. That night, her house was colder than it had ever been. The heater stayed off, the silence only broken by the creaking of the old floorboards. She wrapped herself in a blanket, her breath forming faint clouds in the dim light. Her fingers were stiff with cold, but when she closed her eyes, she whispered a small prayer for the stranger she'd helped. "Keep him safe, Lord," she murmured. "He looked like he's been through enough." She had no idea that her quiet act of kindness was already setting something much bigger in motion. The next morning dawned gray and still. Martha woke to an unfamiliar sound, a deep, distant rumble that shook the small window panes of her bedroom. At first, she thought it was thunder, but as it grew louder, closer, the sound became distinct, a steady, rhythmic growl that could only come from engines. Curious, she shuffled to the window and drew back the thin curtain. Her jaw fell open. The street below was filled, completely filled, with motorcycles. Dozens of them, gleaming chrome and black leather, stretching down both sides of the road. At least 50 riders sat astride their bikes, their engines purring like lions waiting to roar. And at the very front stood the young man from the highway. He removed his helmet, revealing a wide grin. "Morning, Miss Martha," he shouted up at her window. "Told you I'd come back." She blinked in disbelief. What in heaven's name? When she stepped outside, the cold morning air carried the deep hum of the engines. The riders turned their heads toward her, smiles spreading across their faces. Some raised gloved hands in greeting. The young biker stepped forward, his leather jacket marked with the emblem of his group, Steel Hearts Brotherhood. "I told the guys what you did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "How you gave your last $10 to a stranger, just so I could get gas and make it home." Martha blushed, waving a hand. "Oh, it was nothing. You look like you needed help, that's all." The man shook his head. No, ma'am. It was everything. You didn't just help me. You reminded me what kindness looks like. He turned slightly and gestured behind him. These men and women here, they're my family. And when they heard about you, they decided we had to do something. Before she could respond, a woman with fiery red hair stepped out of the crowd. She was holding a small set of keys, which she placed carefully in Martha's trembling hand. "What's this?" Martha whispered. The woman smiled. "Your new home, ma'am." For a moment, Martha thought she'd misheard. My what?" The young biker nodded. "We found out your house's roof was falling apart. The heater's broken. You've been living on next to nothing. So we took up a collection, reached out to a few sponsors, and well," he pointed down the street. Martha followed his gaze and gasped. At the end of the road stood a freshly painted cottage, small but beautiful. The porch had a swing, the windows sparkled, and a little garden was already planted with daisies. A ramp led up to the door instead of steps, and smoke curled gently from a new chimney. "That's yours, Miss Martha," he said quietly, free and clear. Her hands shook as she stared at the house. I don't deserve this," she whispered. He smiled softly. "You deserve the world, ma'am. You reminded us that even the smallest act of kindness can start a wildfire." Behind him, 50 engines rumbled as if in agreement. The air vibrated with their power, but also with something deeper: gratitude, respect, love. Martha covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I only gave you $10, she said, her voice breaking. He chuckled. "And you got 50 hearts in return." The street seemed to shimmer in the morning light as Martha stood frozen, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. The bikers began to remove their helmets one by one. Men and women of all ages, from burly, tattooed riders to soft-spoken women with kind eyes. Each of them wore a patch that read Steelheart's Brotherhood, but what struck Martha most wasn't their rough exteriors. It was the warmth in their faces. She looked from one to another, her trembling hands clutching the keys. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. The young man smiled. "You already said it last night, when you gave what little you had to help a stranger." That was all the talking needed. The red-haired woman gently took Martha's arm. "Come on, honey. Let's show you what we built." They walked together down the street as the other bikers followed, their heavy boots thudding softly on the pavement. Some neighbors had come outside, still in their robes and slippers, staring in awe at the unusual parade. Children pointed at the motorcycles, waving eagerly. When they reached the new cottage, Martha stopped at the gate. She ran her hand along the smooth wooden fence, the fresh white paint gleaming under the weak sun. Her eyes took in every detail. The little flower boxes beneath the windows, the wind chimes swaying softly by the porch, the scent of new lumber and varnish in the air. Her fingers brushed the porch railing as she whispered, "It's beautiful." The young biker nodded proudly. "A few of us are carpenters, some are electricians, and one of the ladies runs a local renovation company. We all pitched in. It took just 3 days to finish." Martha covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. 3 days? He chuckled. "We don't waste time when it's for something that matters." Inside, the house looked like a dream pulled straight from her prayers. A small fireplace glowed warmly. A brand-new heater hummed softly in the corner, and cozy furniture filled the room. On the kitchen counter sat a basket filled with groceries, fresh bread, canned goods, and a note that read, "For Miss Martha, with love, the Steel Hearts." Her eyes fell on the table by the window. There sat a framed photograph of her old house, taken before it fell into disrepair. Someone had found it, cleaned the frame, and placed it beside a new one, a picture of her standing outside the cottage, smiling, surrounded by the bikers. She turned toward them, voice trembling. "You did all this for me?" A tall man with a gray beard stepped forward. "You gave our brother a reason to believe in good again. He'd been drifting, ma'am. Lost his job, lost his faith in people. That night, you changed that." The young biker looked down, his eyes glistening. "Before I met you, I was thinking about giving up. My mom died 2 years ago, and since then I just kept riding to outrun the emptiness. You stopped that ride." Martha's lip quivered as she reached out and took his hand. "Oh, son," she whispered, "you didn't have to outrun it. You just needed to find your way home." He smiled, his grip firm but gentle. "Guess I did." The other bikers nodded, some wiping their eyes. The red-haired woman spoke softly. "We wanted you to know that goodness still matters in this world, ma'am. You reminded us of that." For the next hour, the street turned into a celebration. Neighbors brought coffee. Children sat on bikes and took pictures, and laughter replaced the usual quiet of the block. The bikers helped Martha unpack, showing her where everything was: the heater controls, the stock pantry, even a small box of gardening tools by the back door. When she opened the door to the bedroom, she gasped again. The bed was neatly made, covered with a handmade quilt. Embroidered in one corner were the words, "Kindness always finds its way home." Her hands trembled as she traced the stitching. Who made this? A younger rider with a gentle smile raised her hand. "My grandma and I sewed it last night. She said every good woman deserves to sleep warm." Martha turned away, unable to stop her tears. "I can't ever repay you for this." The young biker stepped closer and shook his head. "You already did, ma'am. You reminded us of something we'd forgotten, that there's still light in this world, even when everything feels dark." The rumble of engines began again as the riders prepared to leave. One by one, they shook Martha's hand or hugged her gently before mounting their bikes. The young man lingered last, his helmet tucked under his arm. "You sure you'll be okay here?" he asked. Martha smiled through her tears. "I've been okay for a long time, son. Just didn't know it till today." He nodded, eyes soft. "You ever need anything, you call the Steel Hearts. We'll come running." She chuckled faintly. "I'll hold you to that." With that, he put on his helmet, started his bike, and joined the others. 50 engines roared to life, filling the street with thunder that made the ground vibrate. But to Martha, it wasn't noise, it was music. It was the sound of gratitude, of lives intertwined by a single act of kindness. Neighbors waved as the group rode off into the distance, the sound of engines fading slowly until all that was left was the whisper of wind. Martha stood on her new porch, watching until there were only specks on the horizon. She sank into the porch swing, letting it creak softly beneath her. For the first time in years, she felt warmth, not just from a new heater, but from something deeper. The world, she realized, still had good people. She looked up at the cloudy sky and whispered, "Henry, looks like the world hasn't forgotten kindness after all." A single sunbeam broke through the clouds, falling across her face like a blessing. She smiled, closing her eyes. That night, as she sat by the fire, Martha took a small notebook from her drawer and began to write. "It was just $10, she scribbled, her handwriting shaky but sure. But it came back as 50 hearts. Maybe that's how kindness works. You get what you can, and somehow the world gives it back multiplied." She placed the notebook on the mantel beside a photograph of her late husband. "Guess you were right, Henry," she whispered softly. "The good we send out always finds its way home." Outside, the wind howled across the fields. But inside, her little cottage glowed like a lantern in the dark. The flicker of the fire danced against the walls. And for the first time in years, Martha fell asleep without worrying about the cold. She dreamed of motorcycles roaring under a golden sky, of strangers who became family, and the endless road where kindness travels, never lost, always returning. Because sometimes, all it takes is $10 to prove that miracles aren't bought, they're shared. In a world that often feels harsh and unforgiving, Martha's story reminds us that no gesture of kindness is ever wasted. A trembling hand, a small bill, or a gentle word, they can all spark something vast and unstoppable. Because love, once given, has a way of coming home,